8,400, 34,000, 112,000. Comment feeds on the side of the screen began scrolling so fast the text became a blur of red and white. Hashtag #AMNationAffair was typed for the first time. David the audio tech slowly dropped his hands, staring at the screen in pure terror as Elena's voice rang out through the speakers. Marcus, if David finds out, he'll destroy us both. Oh no, David the audio tech whispered, his face turning pale white. Oh no, no, no. Nora sat with her feet up on her desk, drinking lukewarm green tea, when her phone suddenly began buzzing. Then her laptop chimed. Then her secondary work phone rang. Within 15 seconds, every screen in her office was flashing red with high-priority notifications. She picked up her personal phone. It was the president of Network Entertainment. Nora, the voice on the line shouted before she could even say hello. Why are my two lead anchors confessing their forbidden love to 3 million people on YouTube right now? Nora dropped her tea. She vaulted over her coffee table, threw open her office door, and ran full speed down the carpeted hallway toward the control room, her heels clicking like gunfire against the floor. Cut the feed, Nora screamed as she burst into the audio bay. Cut the feed right now. David the audio tech slammed his palm down on the master kill switch. The monitors snapped to black, replaced instantly by an emergency color bar pattern and a dull test tone. Silence fell over the room. Nora stood panting, staring at the live analytics screen. The clip had already been clipped, screen recorded, and re-uploaded to 6 different social media platforms. The numbers were astronomical. Tell me that was a rehearsal for a radio play? Nora whispered, her voice dangerously calm. It wasn't a play, Nora. David the audio tech squeaked, holding up his hands. The fader was open. The emergency line called the wrong David Miller, and then the other David Miller showed up at the gate, and my elbow. Shut up, Nora commanded softly. She turned on her heel and marched down the hallway toward stage A. Marcus and Elena were still standing near the anchor desk, completely unaware of the digital tsunami that had just hit the internet. We need to talk about this after the show, Elena was saying, nervously adjusting her collar. We have to be professional. The heavy double doors of the stage slammed open. Nora strode down the center aisle, her phone held out like a weapon. Professional, Nora barked, her voice echoing off the high rafters. You two think you're being professional? Marcus straightened up, putting on his smooth anchor voice. Nora, whatever issue there is with the taped segments, we can easily re-record. Nora hit play on her phone and held it up between them. Marcus's own voice blasted out of the tiny speaker. Asterisk. I don't care about the show anymore. Elena, I love you. Asterisk. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus went completely still, the color draining from his face until he looked like a statue. That went out live, Nora said, her eyes flashing. To 4 million people. It is currently the #1 trending topic on Earth. Before either of them could speak, the doors at the back of the stage burst open again. David, Elena's husband, immaculate even at 2:30 a.m. in an unbuttoned suit jacket, marched onto the floor, trailed by 2 sweaty security guards trying awkwardly to hold him back. Elena, David, Elena's husband, demanded, looking furious and completely confused. What is going on here? Security tried to stop me. Someone called my house telling me to report to Audio Booth B. David the audio tech poked his head out from behind the curtain, pointing wildly. That's him. That's the other David Miller. I swear I didn't call him. David, Elena's husband, rounded on the technician. Who are you? I'm David Miller, the audio tech yelled back. The guy who actually works here. I'm David Miller, the attorney snapped back, holding up his leather wallet. And I want to know why this studio is calling my emergency line at 2 in the morning. Oh, for heaven's sake, Nora shouted, throwing her hands in the air. I don't care about the Davids. I care about the fact that my morning show is currently exploding on national television. David, Elena's husband, froze, looking from Nora to Marcus, to his wife's pale face. He looked down at Elena's tablet, which was now flashing with dozens of incoming text messages from their mutual friends. Elena, David, Elena's husband, asked softly, his tone suddenly dropping into something far darker. What is she talking about? Elena looked at her husband, then turned her eyes slowly toward Marcus, who stood completely speechless under the glare of the studio lights. Nora looked at her watch. The red digital clock on the wall read 05:15:00. You two have 45 minutes, Nora said, her voice icy and precise as she looked at Marcus. And Elena, you are going to sit at that desk. You are going to go live at 6 o'clock sharp. And you are going to explain to 20 million viewers exactly what happens next. The red digital clock above the anchor desk ticked over to 5 hours and 17 minutes. 43 minutes until 6 o'clock. 43 minutes until millions of viewers across the country tuned in expecting traffic, weather, and cheerful morning banter, only to watch two news anchors whose private lives had just been laid completely bare. The silence on stage A was suffocating. Heavy studio cables snaked across the floor like dark veins, and under the glare of the overhead LEDs, every trace of color seemed to have drained from Marcus's face. He stood near the desk, his back straight, his mouth set in a hard, rigid line, the picture-perfect anchorman frozen in horror. A few feet away, David, Elena's husband, was still holding his leather wallet, his knuckles white against the dark leather. His gaze slowly moved from Nora, who stood with her arms crossed and a phone buzzing relentlessly in her hand, over to Marcus, and finally to Elena. Elena, David, Elena's husband, said again. His tone wasn't loud. It had lost the baffled, irritated edge it had possessed just moments earlier when arguing with security. Now, it was cold, quiet, and dangerously sharp, the voice of a high-powered trial attorney zeroing in on a critical flaw in a witness's testimony. What is she talking about? Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat felt bone-dry. The air in the studio, usually chilled to keep the cameras from overheating, suddenly felt stiflingly hot. I asked you a question, David, Elena's husband, said, taking a deliberate step toward the anchor desk. Why is the executive producer of your show saying that you and Marcus were broadcast to 4 million people talking about a weekend at the coast? David, please, Elena managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. She looked frantically toward the shadows at the edge of the stage, where a few stagehands were standing glued to the floor, terrified to move. Not here. Not like this. Not like this. David, Elena's husband, let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the high rafters. You think I wanted to be pulled out of bed at 2 in the morning by some panicking PA who couldn't even dial the right extension? I came here because I thought you were hurt. I thought there was an emergency. There is an emergency. Nora cut in sharply, stepping directly between David, Elena's husband, and the anchor desk. And as much as I sympathize with your personal life collapsing, Mr. Miller, my network is currently bleeding advertisers by the second. Security. The two security guards who had followed David, Elena's husband, onto the set shifted uncomfortably on their feet. Get him off the floor, Nora ordered, pointing toward the heavy exit doors. Take him to my office. Get him a coffee. Get him a chair. But get him off my stage right now. Don't touch me. David, Elena's husband, snapped, swinging around to face the guards. He turned back to Elena, pointing a finger at her. We are not finished with this. Do you hear me? You come home, or my firm files the papers by noon. He turned on his heel and marched toward the exit, the security guards trailing nervously behind him. The heavy doors slammed shut with a dull thud that seemed to rattle the entire studio. As soon as the doors closed, the tension on set didn't dissipate. It simply shifted. David, the audio tech, who had been hiding behind the curtain near the audio bay, peeked his head back out. Nora? Should I clear the line now? Go back to your board, David, Nora snapped without looking at him. And if you touch another toggle switch tonight, I will personally see to it that you never work in broadcast media again." David the audio tech ducked back behind the curtain like a turtle retreating into its shell. Marcus finally broke his silence. He took a slow breath, adjusting his tie with hands that trembled slightly. "Nora, you can't possibly expect us to go on air in 40 minutes. Look at her. Look at me. We need to issue a written statement through PR." "A written statement?" Nora laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. She walked up to the desk, slamming her tablet down on the smooth glass surface. The screen was covered in headlines from every major news outlet and entertainment site. AM Nation anchors caught on hot mic. Secret affair revealed on overnight stream. Marcus Vance and Elena Rostova. The scandal rocking morning TV. "The internet doesn't want a written statement, Marcus," Nora said, leaning over the desk so she was eye to eye with him. "They want blood. They want to see how you look at each other when the camera turns on. If we go to a backup broadcast or put on reruns, we look guilty, cowardly, and finished. The network loses $50 million in market value before the sun comes up." "We are finished, Nora," Elena said, her voice cracking as she finally found her footing. She gripped the edge of the desk, staring at her producer. "How do you expect us to sit here, look into Lens 1, and read the morning headlines like our lives didn't just explode 5 minutes ago?" "Because you're professionals," Nora said coldly. "Because you signed a 8-figure contract that says when 6 o'clock hits, you sit in those chairs and you deliver the news. You want to figure out what happens to your lives? Fine. Do it at 7 o'clock when the broadcast ends. But at 6 o'clock, you belong to the network." Nora turned to the wardrobe and makeup crew standing frozen by the side doors. "Get them into makeup. Fix her eyes, repress his jacket, and get them back in those chairs in 20 minutes. Nora turned around and walked briskly back toward the control room, leaving Marcus and Elena standing alone under the harsh, unblinking glare of the lights. Marcus looked at Elena. For the first time all night, there were no cameras running, no hot mics open, and no husband in the room. Just the two of them. "Elena," Marcus began, taking a step toward her. "Don't," Elena whispered, stepping back. She looked at him with an expression that broke his heart. A mixture of fear, anger, and utter exhaustion. "Just don't, Marcus." Chapter 3. The makeup room smelled of hairspray, expensive foundation, and absolute panic. Elena sat frozen in the hydraulic chair while two stylists worked on her in tense, terrifying silence. One was dabbing concealer under her swollen eyes with rhythmic, mechanical taps, while the other ran a hot iron through her dark hair. Across the room, Marcus sat in his own chair, staring blankly at the lit mirror while a third stylist aggressively dusted his jawline with translucent powder to cut the shine of cold sweat. 5 minutes to air. The floor manager's voice boomed down the hallway, echoing through the open door. Neither of them spoke. The unuttered words between them hung like smoke in the small room. Every time Marcus shifted in his chair, catching Elena's eye in the mirror reflection, she immediately looked down at her lap, her hands tightly clutching a crumpled tissue. The door clicked open, and Nora walked in, holding 2 printed sheets of paper. The air in the room instantly grew colder. "Here is your open," Nora said, handing one script to Marcus and one to Elena. Marcus looked down at the paper, his eyebrows drawing together. "What is this? This isn't the morning rundown." "The morning rundown is in the trash," Nora replied calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "You have 30 seconds at 6 o'clock to address the elephant in the room." You read those statements word for word. No improvising, no emotional outbursts, no long-winded apologies. You acknowledge the stream, you ask for privacy, and then you move directly into the breaking news from Capitol Hill. Elena glanced down at the text on her page. "Before we begin our coverage this morning, we want to address the technical broadcast error that occurred earlier today." "A technical broadcast error?" Elena looked up, a sharp, disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. "Nora," My husband is sitting in your office right now with a legal team on speed dial. The entire internet watched Marcus tell me he loves me. Calling it a technical error makes us look ridiculous. It buys us time, Nora said, her voice dropping into a razor-thin warning. It gives the PR firm 48 hours to spin this before the board meets on Thursday. If you go out there and start pouring your hearts out on live television, you will both be terminated for breach of contract before the first commercial break. Do you understand me? Marcus crumpling the paper slightly in his fist. Nora, this is insane. We're going to get slaughtered. You should have thought about that before you left your lapel mic on, Marcus, Nora said cleanly. She looked at her watch. 3 minutes. Get to the set. She turned and left, her heels clicking a rapid rhythm down the corridor. The stylists hurriedly pulled away their drapes and packed up their brushes, eager to escape the radioactive tension radiating off the two anchors. Marcus stood up first, buttoning his navy suit jacket. He held out a hand to help Elena up, but she ignored it, standing on her own and smoothing down the front of her red dress. Elena, wait, Marcus said softly, catching her arm just before she reached the door. She stopped, but she didn't turn around. Don't, Marcus. We're going into a war zone out there, he said, his voice pleading. We have to be on the same page. Whatever happens after the show, I meant what I said. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Elena turned her head slightly, her profile sharp in the hallway light. You ruined my life tonight, Marcus, and you ruined your own. If you really care about me at all, you'll read the script, keep your mouth shut, and pretend you're the best actor on television for the next 2 hours. She pulled her arm away and walked down the dimly lit corridor toward the stage. In studio, a sound stage. Continuous. The floor was dead quiet when they walked out. The stagehands, who usually threw friendly jokes or passed around coffee cups before 6 o'clock, wouldn't even make eye contact. They focused intently on their clipboards, their monitors, and their camera rigs. Elena took her seat on the left side of the polished wooden desk. Marcus took his seat on the right. Between them lay a vast, empty expanse of glass top that felt wider than an ocean. Above camera 1, the digital countdown clock was glowing bright red. 5 hours 58 minutes and 45 seconds, 5 hours 58 minutes and 46 seconds in the audio bay. David the audio tech sat with his hands hovering 3 inches above the soundboard, terrified to touch anything without explicit orders from the control room through his headset. 10 seconds, the floor manager called out, holding up a hand with outstretched fingers. Marcus cleared his throat, sitting up straight and throwing his shoulders back, slipping into the practiced posture of a professional broadcasting veteran. Beside him, Elena took a long, slow breath, closing her eyes for a brief second before opening them to stare directly into the glass lens of camera 1. 5, 4. The floor manager silently counted down the last 3 seconds with his fingers. The red light on top of camera 1 flicked on. Good morning, Marcus said, his voice remarkably smooth, though the tension tight around his mouth betrayed him. It is 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning. I'm Marcus Vance. And I'm Elena Rostova, Elena said, her voice steady, though her hands were clamped tight together underneath the desk, out of view of the frame. Before we bring you today's top stories, we want to address an incident that occurred on our overnight digital feed. Chapter 4. The silence following Elena's words felt like a physical weight in the studio. In the control room, Nora leaned forward, her fingers digging into the edge of the console. Hold on her, Nora ordered through the headset. Keep camera 1 tight. Elena looked straight into the lens, the script lying ignored on the desk in front of her. Earlier this morning, an unedited audio stream was briefly made public due to a technical error. We know many of you watched it, and we know the questions it raised. Beside her, Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't the script. She was off book. He subtly shifted in his chair, opening his mouth to step in, but Elena continued before he could speak. We owe our audience complete transparency, Elena said, her voice trembling slightly before regaining its firm edge. What was overheard was a private conversation. It was personal, it was messy, and it should never have taken place on this set or anywhere else. In the audio bay, David the audio tech held his breath, staring at the level meters. They were green, steady, and terrifyingly clear. We deeply regret the disruption this has caused to our viewers, our crew, and most importantly, our families, Elena said, her eyes glistening under the bright lights, though no tears fell. While the network conducts an internal review, we are committed to delivering the news to you today with the professionalism you expect from us. She paused, taking a slow, steadying breath, and turned her head to look directly at Marcus. The live feed cut to a wide shot, capturing the distance between them at the long desk. Marcus met her gaze. For 2 seconds, on live national television, the mask completely slipped. The anchor persona vanished, leaving only a man looking at the woman he loved, realizing the immense wreckage laid out between them. Marcus, Elena said softly, stepping back into the role of co-anchor. The top story this morning. Marcus blinked, pulling himself back from the brink. He looked down at the teleprompter, forcing his voice into its familiar, resonant register. "Thank you, Elena," Marcus said, his hands flat against the desk. Turning to Washington, Senate leaders reached a last-minute deal overnight. In the control room, Nora let out a long, ragged breath and slumped back into her chair. "Did she just save us or ruin us?" the assistant producer whispered beside her. Nora stared at the bank of monitors. The live online chat was moving at an impossible speed, but the tone had shifted from pure mockery to intense, fixated intrigue. "She just guaranteed 40 million people watch the rest of this broadcast," Nora said quietly. "Get ready for the first commercial break. And someone check on her husband in my office before he tears the door off its hinges." The red on-air light flicked off as the broadcast went to its first commercial break. The moment the feed cut, Elena pushed her chair back, pulled off her lapel microphone, and laid it quietly on the glass desk. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at the floor manager signaling a 3-minute clock. She stood up and walked straight toward the back exit of the stage. "Elena, wait," Marcus called, unclipping his own mic and hurrying around the desk. "Don't follow me, Marcus," she said without turning around. She pushed through the heavy acoustic doors, stepping into the quiet, dimly lit hallway behind the studio. Standing at the end of the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest, was David, her husband. The 2 security guards stood a polite 10 feet away, looking deeply uncomfortable. "You said your piece," David, her husband, said as Elena approached. His voice was flat, hollowed out by exhaustion and betrayal. "On national television." "David." Elena stopped a few feet short of him. The adrenaline that had carried her through the opening 5 minutes of the show was rapidly fading, leaving her trembling. "We need to talk. Privately. Away from this building." "There's nothing left to talk about privately, Elena," David, her husband, said softly. He pulled a folded set of papers from his coat pocket. Not legal documents, but a printed hotel reservation receipt from 3 weeks ago that he had found in her desk at home. He dropped it onto a nearby equipment crate. "You made our private life public the moment you brought him into it." Marcus stepped through the stage doors, stopping dead when he saw the 2 of them standing in the corridor. David, her husband, glanced up, locking eyes with Marcus. For a second, the hallway was completely silent. No loud arguments, no dramatic outbursts, just the cold, sharp realization of 2 men standing on opposite sides of a shattered marriage. "You can have her, Marcus," David, her husband, said quietly, turning back toward the exit. "And you can have the fallout that comes with her." He didn't wait for a response. He pushed through the exterior doors and walked out into the cool morning air, leaving the heavy doors to swing shut behind him. Elena stood motionless in the corridor, staring at the empty doorway. 15 seconds to back on air," the floor manager called out, poking his head through the stage doors. "Marcus," Elena, we need you in your chairs right now. Elena took a slow, painful breath, pulled her posture upright, and turned back toward the studio. As she brushed past Marcus, he reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder, not quite daring to touch her. Elena, I'm so sorry, Marcus whispered. Elena paused at the entrance to the stage, looking at him over her shoulder. Save it for the news, Marcus. We still have 50 minutes left. The studio felt twice as large and 10 times colder than it had an hour ago. Every second that passed under the unblinking eye of camera one felt like an eternity. Between news hits, the silence between Marcus and Elena was a heavy, physical wall. They sat side by side, perfectly posed, reading copy about international trade deals and local weather patterns with the practiced grace of veteran broadcasters. But every time the camera panned out or cut to a commercial, the mask dropped instantly. Neither looked at the other. Neither spoke. Over in the control room, Nora's phone had stopped buzzing only because the battery was rapidly dying. Network executives were sending frantic emails every 30 seconds. Mainstream media outlets had already published initial write-ups analyzing Elena's impromptu off-script opening. 2 minutes until final toss. The floor manager's voice cracked through Marcus's earpiece. Wrap it up clean, folks. Marcus cleared his throat, staring down at his digital copy. His fingers were stiff against the glass desk. He looked over at Elena. Her side profile was locked in an expression of rigid endurance, her hands still clutched together under the table out of view. The red tally light on camera 2 glowed to life. That brings us to the end of our first hour of AM Nation, Marcus said, his voice carrying a strained, unnatural resonance. We want to thank you for staying with us this morning. We will be taking a short break tomorrow as the network reviews our broadcast operations, Elena added smoothly, her eye line locked directly onto the lens. Thank you for your time, your patience, and your support. Good morning. Cut! The floor manager yelled, snapping his fingers. We are clear. The moment the red light died, the tension in the room snapped like a over-tightened wire. Elena pulled her mic off before the stage manager could even step up to help her. She stood up, grabbed her leather tote bag from beside the desk, and made a straight line for the exit doors without a single backward glance. Elena! Marcus stood up, pushing his chair back so hard the casters squeaked against the floor. He ignored the floor crew, ignored the lingering eyes of the stagehands, and hurried out the door into the backstage hallway after her. Elena! Stop, please. She kept walking, her heels clicking rapidly against the polished concrete floor, heading toward the private rear exit that led out to the parking garage. Elena! He caught up to her near the heavy steel door, grabbing the handle just before she could push it open. You can't just walk out like this. We have to deal with what happens next. She turned around slowly. Up close, the thick studio makeup couldn't hide the deep dark circles under her eyes or the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. What happens next, Marcus? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. You want to talk about what happens next? My marriage is over. My career is effectively in ashes. The network is going to suspend us both by noon, and every tabloid in the country is going to spend the next 6 months picking through our lives. We can face it together, Marcus insisted, stepping closer, his voice dropping into an urgent whisper. I meant what I said on that mic, Elena. I've meant it for months. We don't have to hide anymore. It's out there. The absolute worst has already happened. Elena looked at him, a cold, bitter smile touching her lips. You really don't get it, do you? Get what? The worst hasn't happened yet, Marcus, she said, leaning in close so only he could hear her. You think this was an accident? You think David the audio tech just happened to bump a switch while a phone call got misdirected? Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing. What are you talking about? It was a disaster. A complete stroke of terrible luck. I looked at the audio board log on my way out of the makeup room, Elena whispered, her eyes flashing. The primary routing override didn't flick over because someone hit it with their elbow. It was manually rerouted from the master server 10 minutes before we even sat down at the desk. Marcus froze, the blood running cold in his veins. What? Someone set us up, Elena said, pushing open the heavy steel door to the garage, letting the gray, damp morning light pour into the hallway. And until I find out who wanted us ruined this badly, stay away from me. The damp air of the parking garage swept into the hallway, smelling of cold concrete and exhaust fumes. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, holding the heavy steel door open as Elena walked away, her footsteps echoing sharply against the concrete pillars. Elena, wait, Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. What do you mean, manually rerouted? She didn't stop. She reached her silver sedan, tapped her key fob to unlock it, and opened the driver's side door. Before climbing in, she looked back across the half-empty garage. The morning light filtering through the open ramps caught the sharp angle of her jaw. Ask Nora, Elena said, her voice carrying across the quiet space. Or ask your agent, but don't call me. She slid into the driver's seat, pulled the door shut, and started the engine. Marcus watched as her taillights flared bright red, illuminating the dark garage before she accelerated toward the exit gate, leaving him standing alone in the quiet gloom. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Set up? He turned and pushed back through the heavy steel doors, marching down the corridor toward the executive wing. The studio was eerie now. The floor lights were turned off, and the crew had scattered like smoke, leaving empty coffee cups and discarded scripts behind. When Marcus reached the executive suite, he didn't knock. He pushed open the double doors to Nora's office. Nora was sitting behind her glass desk, her laptop open, two phones resting side by side on charging pads. Sitting in one of the leather armchairs across from her was David the audio tech, looking pale, sweating profusely, and wringing his hands in his lap. Marcus, Nora said without looking up from her screen, her fingers flying across her keyboard. I told you to go home and wait for PR to contact you. Did you do it? Marcus demanded, shutting the door behind him with a heavy thud. David the audio tech flinched, pulling his shoulders up to his ears. Nora slowly stopped typing. She rested her elbows on the desk, folded her hands, and looked up at Marcus with cold, unblinking eyes. Did I do what? Nora asked smoothly. The routing switch, Marcus said, taking 3 long strides toward the desk. He pointed an accusing finger down at the audio tech. Elena checked the server logs. The feed didn't accidentally flip when David bumped the board. It was locked onto global output 10 minutes before we even walked on set. Who opened the line? David the audio tech looked up, his eyes wide with genuine panic. I didn't do it, Mr. Vance. I swear to God. When the PA called me about Booth B, I thought the board was set to internal loop. I didn't check the server routing because it's never changed manually unless someone logs into the master control deck upstairs. Marcus turned his glare to Nora. Who had access to master control at 2 in the morning, Nora? Nora leaned back in her high-backed chair, completely unfazed by the accusation. She picked up a white porcelain mug, took a calm sip of coffee, and set it down softly on a coaster. Every senior producer in this building has access, Marcus, Nora said quietly, including the ones who knew your 5-year contract was up for renewal next month. The ones who knew the network was deciding whether to give you a $20 million raise or cut you loose and give the main desk to someone younger. Marcus felt a cold sensation settle in his chest. You think someone inside the network leaked the feed to sink my contract negotiations? I don't think, Marcus. I know, Nora said, leaning forward and tapping her laptop screen. The video clip didn't just go viral on its own. The moment the line went live, a pre-recorded high-definition file of your little confession was emailed directly to 3 major entertainment tabloids from an anonymous proxy server inside this very building. Marcus stared at her, the reality of the situation slamming into him like a physical blow. It wasn't just an affair caught on a bad mic. It was a calculated, ruthless assassination of his career, and Elena had been dragged right into the center of it. Who? Marcus asked, his voice barely a breath. Who sent the email? Nora closed her laptop with a quiet click. That's what I'm trying to find out, Nora said. And until I do, you are officially suspended, effective immediately. Hand over your keycard, Marcus. You're off the air. Marcus stood motionless in the middle of Nora's office, the silence heavy between them. Hand it over, Marcus, Nora repeated, reaching out an open palm. Company policy. While the board investigates the breach and the fallout, neither you nor Elena are permitted on network property. Slowly, Marcus reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out the silver and black studio keycard that had granted him access to every corner of the building for the past 7 years. He dropped it onto her desk. It landed with a soft, final clack. What about Elena? Marcus asked, his jaw tight. Is she suspended too? Elena left 30 minutes ago, Nora said, pulling the keycard toward her and locking it in her desk drawer. Her agent has already called 5 times trying to get ahead of the story. Right now, her primary focus isn't the network. It's her husband's law firm threatening to turn this into a high-visibility divorce battle. David the audio tech shrank further into his chair, staring intently at the carpet as if trying to blend into the floorboards. You need to leave through the basement service exit, Nora added, pointing toward a side door behind her desk. There are already 3 paparazzi vans parked outside the main gates on 57th Street. If they catch you on camera leaving the building right now, the network's PR team won't be able to protect you. Marcus didn't say another word. He turned on his heel, pushed open the heavy service door, and walked down the concrete stairwell toward the lower levels of the studio complex. The stairwell was cold and echoed with every step he took. His head was spinning. The sheer speed at which his life had derailed was dizzying. Just 6 hours ago, he had been sitting on the set, holding a cup of coffee, rehearsing minor news copy with the woman he loved. Now, he was a suspended anchor walking out the back door to avoid a horde of photographers, his career in ashes and his reputation ruined. He reached the subterranean service garage, a dimly lit area usually reserved for delivery trucks and trash compactors. The cool, damp air felt like a slap in the face. He pulled out his phone. The screen was completely flooded with notifications. 62 missed calls, dozens of unread text messages from his manager, his publicist, and distant relatives, and endless breaking news alerts flashing across the top of his screen. Ignoring all of them, he opened his contacts and dialed Elena's private number. It rang once. It rang twice. 3 times. Hi, you've reached Elena. Please leave a message after the tone. He hung up without leaving a voicemail. He knew she wouldn't listen to it anyway. Instead, he opened his messaging app and typed out a short, simple text. It wasn't an accident. Nora confirmed the file was sent from inside the building before the broadcast even started. We're both suspended. I know you don't want to talk to me right now, but please be careful. Someone planned this. He hit send. The tiny blue icon marked it as delivered, but no typing indicator appeared in response. Marcus pushed through the metal turnstile and stepped out into the misty morning air of the side alley. High above him, mounted on the brick wall across the street, a massive electronic billboard flashed through its morning rotation of ads. Suddenly, the screen changed. A high-definition image of Marcus and Elena filled the entire 10-story display, accompanied by giant, glowing white text that made his stomach drop. AM Nation Scandal. Who leaked the tape? Special report at 11. Marcus pulled his coat collar up around his neck, lowered his head against the rising wind, and walked out into the city, realizing that the story was no longer theirs to tell. The rain began as a dull drizzle over Manhattan, turning the pavement slick and dark. Marcus pulled his baseball cap low over his forehead, avoiding the glances of pedestrians huddled under umbrellas as he hailed a cab on 8th Avenue. His phone vibrated relentlessly in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting another frantic call from his publicist, but the screen showed an unknown number with a local area code. He slid his thumb across the screen and held the phone to his ear. Hello, Marcus. The voice on the other end was familiar, sharp, and entirely devoid of warmth. It was David, Elena's husband. Marcus paused in the doorway of the yellow cab, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat onto his coat collar. "David, I know you're suspended," David, Elena's husband, said quietly over the line. "I just left my office. My firm's investigators looked into the server logs for the network stream." Marcus froze, motioning for the cab driver to wait a moment. What did they find? The email that sent that video clip to the tabloids didn't originate from the production bay. David, Elena's husband, said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, measured cadence. "It was sent from a private network port registered directly to your personal dressing room, Marcus." Marcus felt the breath leave his lungs as if he had been struck. "What? No, that's impossible. I wasn't even in my dressing room at 2 in the morning. I was on set." "I don't care where you were," David, Elena's husband, interrupted coldly. "The digital footprint points straight to you. As far as the network executives and the legal team are concerned, you leaked the recording yourself to force Elena out of her marriage and leverage your contract renewal." "I would never do that to her," Marcus snapped, his voice rising over the sound of traffic. "You know how much I don't know anything about you," David, Elena's husband, cut in. "Except that every second you spend near my wife, her life gets worse. She's at home right now packing her things. And if you try to contact her again, my firm will make sure you never work in media, communications, or public relations for the rest of your life." The line went dead with a sharp click. Marcus stood on the curb, the rain coming down harder now, soaking through his jacket. He stared at the screen of his phone, watching the raindrops streak across the display, realizing the trap had just closed around him. Chapter 10. Marcus didn't get into the cab. He turned his back on the busy street and walked blind through the rain, his mind spinning as the wet asphalt reflected the neon blur of the city. Sent from his dressing room. It was a masterclass in sabotage. Whoever had done this hadn't just exposed the affair. They had built an airtight paper trail designed to make Marcus look like a desperate, manipulative sociopath who threw the woman he loved under the bus just for leverage in a contract negotiation. He pulled out his phone, wiping the rain off the screen with his wet sleeve, and called his personal assistant, Liam. Liam picked up on the first ring. "Marcus, oh thank God. My phone has been ringing off the hook. The network released a statement 10 minutes ago." "Liam, listen to me," Marcus interrupted, his voice tight as he ducked into the dry recessed doorway of a closed coffee shop. "Who had the key code to my dressing room last night?" There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. "Your dressing room?" "Marcus, almost nobody. Just you, me, and—" "Wait. Wait what?" Marcus demanded. "The night shift technical crew had master keycards for all the talent suites during the system update last night," Liam said, his voice dropping as he thought it through. "Nora issued a blanket access clearance at midnight so the IT department could install the new remote access software on all the office terminals." Marcus felt the cold rain dripping off his jaw, but inside, a sudden, burning heat flared in his chest. Remote access software. Who ran the IT update, Liam? "It wasn't an outside vendor," Liam said slowly, the realization dawning on him as well. "It was handled directly by the executive production desk. Nora. Nora hadn't just been managing the crisis in the control room. She had orchestrated the entire drop. She knew Marcus's contract was up for renewal. She knew the network wanted to push him out without paying his massive buyout clause. And by framing him as the leak, she gave the board flawless legal grounds to terminate his contract for cause, while simultaneously generating the highest morning news ratings the network had seen in a decade. Marcus didn't hesitate. He stepped back out into the pouring rain, flagging down an oncoming cab with a sharp wave of his arm. He didn't need to call Elena anymore. He needed to show up at her door with the truth before Nora's spin team completely erased it. He pulled open the cab door and slid into the back seat, wiping the water from his face. 72nd and Park, he told the driver, his voice steady for the first time all morning. "And drive fast." Chapter 11. The rain was coming down in sheets by the time the cab pulled up outside the grand stone facade of the high-rise on Park Avenue. Marcus shoved a wad of wet cash at the driver and bolted out into the downpour, his coat soaked through in seconds. He didn't care about the doorman's startled look as he burst through the revolving glass doors into the marble lobby. "Mr. Vance?" the doorman asked, stepping out from behind the desk, recognizing the famous anchor even under his dripping baseball cap. "Sir, I can't let you up without." "I'm going to 14B, Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that made the guard pause. "Call up if you have to, but I'm going." Before the guard could react, Marcus stepped into the open elevator and slammed his thumb against the button for the 14th floor. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of the storm outside. The quiet hum of the elevator car rose up through the shaft, each floor number glowing red as they ascended. When the doors opened on 14, Marcus stepped out onto the plush carpeted hallway. He walked straight to the polished mahogany door of 14B and knocked hard. Nothing for 10 long seconds. He knocked again. "Elena, it's Marcus. Open the door." A lock clicked. The door pulled back 3 inches, caught on a heavy brass security chain. Elena stood in the gap. She had changed out of her studio dress into a dark sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Behind her in the entryway, 2 large leather suitcases sat waiting by the coat rack. "Are you insane?" Elena whispered, looking past him down the empty hallway. "David just left to meet his legal team. If he finds you here—" "It was Nora," Marcus cut in, stepping right up to the crack in the door so she couldn't shut it. "She set us both up." The remote access software was installed from her desk at midnight. "She used the system update to frame me with the leak so the network could void my contract and avoid paying my buyout." Elena stared at him through the narrow gap. The anger in her eyes faltered, replaced by a flickering shadow of doubt. "What are you talking about?" "She knew my contract was up, Elena. She knew we were close," Marcus said, his voice desperate, raw, and completely stripped of his usual broadcast polish. "She didn't just leak the hot mic. She routed the server directly to my dressing room computer before we even sat at the desk. She wanted a scandal that would bring in massive ratings and give them legal cause to fire me." Elena's hand tightened on the edge of the door. "Marcus, David's lawyers already have the IP logs. They're releasing them to the press in an hour." "Then let me show you the proof before they do," Marcus pleaded, reaching out to rest his hand against the wood. "I didn't betray you. I would burn my whole life to the ground before I ever used you to save my job. You know me, Elena. Look at me and tell me you believe I'd do that." Elena looked into his eyes, the heavy silence hanging thick in the hallway between them. Slowly, her fingers moved to the brass chain. She unlatched it, and the door swung wide open. Chapter 12. Elena stepped back, leaving the door wide open. Marcus walked into the quiet apartment, the rain dripping from his soaked jacket onto the dark hardwood floor. The living room was in disarray. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway, and open wardrobe trunks sat near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a gray, storm-swept Central Park. "Show me," Elena said, her voice steady despite the visible tremor in her hands. She walked over to her glass desk near the window, pulling up her laptop. "Show me how you know it was Nora." Marcus pulled his wet cap off, tossing it onto a chair, and leaned over her shoulder. "Liam told me the technical crew ran a master system update at midnight. Nora personally issued the access codes for the IT department to install remote desktop protocols on every terminal in the executive wing. That's standard protocol before a major quarterly review," Elena countered, though her fingers were already flying across her keyboard, opening the network's internal server portal. "Standard, yes," Marcus said, pointing at her screen. "But look at the timestamp on the master override. The signal that flipped our lapel mics to the global feed didn't come from the control board down in audio booth B. It was triggered from a secondary IP address using an administrative clearance." Elena navigated to the broadcast log archive, entering her personal anchor credentials to bypass the primary firewall. Line after line of code scrolled past. She stopped at 2:14 and 8 seconds a.m. Her breath hitched in her throat. "The audio feed wasn't opened from your dressing room," Elena whispered, staring at the screen. "Your computer was just used as a proxy bounce. The actual command originated from—" She dragged her cursor across the log line, highlighting the source ID. "The executive producer's private terminal." "Nora," Marcus said softly. Elena leaned back in her chair, staring at the glowing screen in total disbelief. She set the audio to broadcast live, bounced the signal through your dressing room terminal to leave a digital trail pointing at you, and then emailed the recorded file to the press before we even finished our opening segment. "She didn't just want a viral story," Marcus said, his eyes darkening. "She wanted total control. If I'm fired for gross misconduct and a deliberate leak, the network doesn't have to pay out my $20 million contract renewal. And if you're caught in the middle of a messy public divorce, your leverage in negotiations is completely gone." Before Elena could reply, her phone on the desk rang. The screen displayed David, husband. Elena looked from the ringing phone up to Marcus. The anger and hurt that had clouded her vision all morning had vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She picked up the phone and hit speaker. "Elena," David, her husband, said over the line, his tone brisk and businesslike. "My legal team is stepping onto the elevator at the studio right now. We are holding a joint press conference with the network's legal representatives at noon to address the leak and file the initial separation papers." Elena looked at Marcus, then back at the laptop screen where Nora's digital signature was clearly stamped on the system breach. "Cancel the press conference, David," Elena said, her voice flat and decisive. A beat of silence on the line. "What?" "I said cancel it," Elena replied, reaching out to save the raw server logs onto a flash drive. "We aren't giving Nora her curtain call." "Elena, you aren't thinking straight." "I have the master system logs, David," she interrupted cleanly. "Marcus is here with me. We have the proof that the network fabricated the leak from the executive desk. If your firm goes on television at noon, you're going to be defending a lie that Nora built to destroy us both." On the other end of the line, David, her husband, went dead silent. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally, the attorney in him recognizing the seismic shift in the situation. Elena looked up at Marcus. For the first time in 12 hours, there was no fear in her eyes, only fire. "Tell your lawyers to stay in that building," Elena said. "Marcus and I are on our way back to Studio A, and this time we're taking the airwaves back." Marcus took a step back, the weight of her words hitting him like a physical force. "Elena, I didn't want it to happen like this. You know I didn't. But the truth is out now. We don't have to hide anymore." "Anymore." "Hide." Elena let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "Marcus, you still don't get it. It wasn't just about hiding a secret. It was about my life, my home, a 10-year marriage that, yes, was broken, but it was mine. You didn't free me, Marcus. A broken audio board and a careless elbow blew up my life on live television." She pushed open the heavy steel door, the cool morning air rushing in from the parking garage. The early daylight was just beginning to streak the sky in pale shades of gray and blue. "Elena, wait," Marcus said, standing in the doorway. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to a hotel," she said, not looking back as she unlocked her car with a sharp beep beep. "I'm turning off my phone, and I'm going to figure out who I am when the cameras aren't rolling and you aren't around." "And us?" Marcus called out, his voice cracking slightly in the empty concrete garage. "What about us?" Elena paused with her hand on the driver's side door handle. She looked back at him across the pavement, at the polished anchorman in his pristine suit, looking smaller and more human than she had ever seen him. "There is no us right now, Marcus," she said quietly. "There's just the fallout." She got into the car, closed the door, and pulled out into the early morning traffic, leaving Marcus standing alone under the harsh fluorescent lights of the garage. Chapter 5. By noon, the network had officially placed both Marcus Vance and Elena Rostova on temporary administrative leave pending a formal board review. The studio released a brief, carefully worded statement expressing commitment to journalistic integrity and professional standards, but the internet had long since moved past official statements. Over 8 million people had watched the clipped video of the hot mic incident. Memes, opinion pieces, and late-night monologue jokes were already flooding every platform. In a quiet corner booth of a diner 4 miles from the studio, David the audio tech sat staring blankly into a mug of cold black coffee. His phone sat on the table next to him, buzzing every few minutes with notifications from news outlets trying to track down the technician responsible for the most famous audio mistake in television history. Nora walked into the diner, her heels clicking softly against the linoleum floor. She slid into the booth across from him, tossing a thick manila folder onto the table. David flinched. "Am I fired?" Nora picked up the sugar dispenser, casually pouring a stream into her own coffee. "Technically, the network wants your head on a spike. Practically, you accidentally gave AM Nation the highest ratings in 30 years. The board is currently debating whether to fire you or give you a producer credit." David blinked. "You're joking." "I never joke about ratings, David," Nora said, taking a sip. She looked out the window at the city street. Marcus is at his house with his legal team. Elena is completely off the grid. Her husband's firm already filed for separation this morning. "I ruined 3 lives with one elbow," David muttered, putting his head in his hands. "No," Nora said firmly, tapping her knuckles on the table until he looked up. "You just turned the volume up on a song that was already playing. They built that powder keg, David. You just happened to drop the match." She stood up, pulling a pair of sunglasses from her coat pocket. "Take the week off," Nora said. "Turn your phone off, and when you come back on Monday, keep your hands off the global broadcast toggle." 2 miles away, in a secluded hotel room overlooking the city skyline, Elena sat on the edge of the bed. The television was turned off. Her phone sat dark and silent on the nightstand. For the first time in 10 years, there were no prompters to read, no producer in her ear, and no expectations to meet. The noise of the world was raging outside, but inside the quiet room, the silence was finally hers. She walked over to the window, watching the sun break through the clouds over the city streets below. Her marriage was over. Her career as she knew it was altered forever. But as she took a deep, clean breath of the morning air, Elena felt something unexpected settling over the wreckage of her old life. It wasn't panic. It was freedom. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you found this story interesting, please consider giving this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you want to hear plenty more stories just like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more to unpack in future videos. See you soon.